I am challenging myself to play some of the most popular video games of all time. But there is a small catch. I am only playing games that I have never played before. The challenge is to see if these hit video games can crack into my top 20 games of all time list. We're going to start off with a Final Fantasy game. Final Fantasy is no doubt one of the largest video game franchises of all time. I mean, not only is it extremely popular, but there are over 100 Final Fantasy games to play. Now, when doing some research, the two clear favorites are Final Fantasy VI and 7. Not only have I not played either of those, I've never played a single Final Fantasy game, period. So while I already own Final Fantasy X for some reason, which is another very popular Final Fantasy game, I decided to go with Final Fantasy VII. Now, the reason I did this is because I truly believe Final Fantasy VII has had a larger impact on not only gaming, but pop culture as a whole. Names like Cloud and Sephiroth. Sephiroth, I hate pronouncing that name. Familiar to the likes of even me, someone who has zero interest whatsoever in Final Fantasy games. Now, going into the game, I did have one key bit of information about it, and it's a pretty big spoiler. Yes, that girl getting absolutely destroyed by Sephiroth. Now, I thought that might happen at the very end of the game, like she would die and then there would be some big epic battle, but boy was I wrong. We'll talk more about that later. Now, in order to experience this game as if I were playing it back in 1997, I decided to play it truthfully on my PlayStation 5. I was going to buy the physical copy on PlayStation 1 and I have the capabilities to play it, but I heard the PlayStation Network port was actually pretty okay, so two birds with one stone. I saved a little bit of money and I play a pretty good port of the game. To also further the feeling that I was back in 1997, I decided to not use any guides or Google any answers of where to go next. Instead, I did what everyone did back then. I would just ask a friend, where do I go next? There's also a fast forward feature on the PlayStation Network version, and I'm too lazy to do any research to see if that was an original feature, but I don't think it was. So I'm also going to try my best not to use that fast forward feature at all. But I did end up learning how extremely impatient I was, especially during that weird tower defense game. I used the fast forward feature a few times, I'm not going to lie. Now, also, back in 1997, I didn't have a wife, and I wasn't married. So I decided to be truthful to the experiment, and I ignored my wife and child for a whole week while playing this game. I was 6 years old when the game was released, and at the time I had no expendable income. Child labour was illegal in Australia at the time. I'm pretty sure it still is, unfortunately. That's a joke, please don't have me cancelled. So not only would I have had to buy the game myself, but I would have also had to have bought a PlayStation 2 console with my $2 a week pocket money. No one I knew owned a PS1 either, so it's not like I could have gone to their house and played it. We were all Nintendo 64 kids. Now, the same year Final Fantasy VII came out, games like Yoshi's Story, GoldenEye 007 and Diddy Kong Racing came out, so it's not like I was begging my mum for a new console because I was bored. I had plenty of options. Star Fox 64 also came out that year. So my point is, I'm not being too harsh on myself as to why I didn't play this game. Truthfully, I was just a Nintendo 64 kid. That's all we owned. Back then, it was realistic to only really own one console at a time. And growing up, even until last week when I played the game, I never really felt like I missed out on a Final Fantasy game, but as I started to play Final Fantasy VII in particular, it really reminded me as to why I love these RPG games, and it made me feel like I was playing Zelda Ocarina of Time for the first time. Now, nostalgia is a strange thing, especially in video games. That feeling we get when we replay a game we played as kids can easily turn an average game into a great game. An example of this for me is Formula 1 pole position on the Nintendo 64. It's a really poor driving game that you can get fully boxed with the manual to this day for like $25. But because it was my first Nintendo 64 game, it holds a special place in my heart. But if I was to show my best friend this game and go, this is one of my childhood games, he would see it for the pile of fecal matter that it truly is. So my point is that just because Final Fantasy VII is highly rated and beloved by millions, it does not mean it will resonate with me and automatically make it into my top 20 games of all time. But as I started to play as Cloud, it was immediately obvious that I was in for a much more in-depth story than pretty much any game for that time period. I was running down a random street and bumped into this flower girl who I sort of recognized. And then I started to wonder how she goes from this random flower girl to this character. A character so beloved that this particular moment is in plenty of those top 10 most shocking moments in video game list videos. Also, Cloud is a bit of an asshole early on. He's a bit of an asshole, or is that just me? Can I also quickly mention that I knew so little going into this game that I had no idea Final Fantasy VII wasn't a medieval RPG game. I was really surprised to see that it was in the future. I honestly had no idea. The appeal of Final Fantasy VII was immediate though. Our name is Cloud and we are a new member of an eco-terrorist group named Avalanche. We are tasked with helping to destroy a reactor that is destroying the Earth, and our actions directly cause thousands of innocent people to die. Wait a second. Aren't we the good guys? Jokes aside, the story is charming, complex, and for most people probably the first of its kind to really discuss real-life politics. I couldn't imagine being a 6-year-old and trying to understand why a world-dominating mega corporation like Shinra would purposefully destroy their own planet and make money that way. I mean, I still don't understand why that happens, and that happens in real life. But to have a video game tell me a story that is essentially happening for real, it's a big deal. But I think where the story shines most is in the way it tugs at our heartstrings and makes us care for these 8-bit, 16-bit, whatever bit they were characters. Not only did we have one main character who we cared about, but we had a whole team and their families we were also rooting for. Which is what makes Disney and Pixar movies so amazing, both to adults and kids, is the fact that they can make us cry, but also make us happy and feel serious at the same time. Now, I'm not saying Final Fantasy VII is the first game to do this, but it definitely seems like it would have been one of the first, and the first that plenty of us played. 6-year-old me would have not been able to follow the story and really understand what it was about. As a matter of fact, 33-year-old me had trouble keeping up at times as it was. But younger me would have known I'm good, Shinra is bad, Sephiroth is really bad, stop them at all costs. When you are in the grand city of Midgar, you go from area to area talking to NPCs and progressing the story. And at that stage, I honestly thought that this would be the whole game. It would be just in this city. And I was okay with that. I was actually really looking forward to just delving into this city, sort of like a cyberpunk sort of game. But little did I know how vast the world was, and when we finally leave Midgar, I was actually pretty intimidated. Final Fantasy VII reminded me what it was like to play those old games. They didn't really tell you where to go next. An NPC would mention it, but there was no missions, there was no tracking, anything like that. Because of this, I actually found myself talking to every available NPC and never skipping a single word. It's something that I struggled to do in games like Mass Effect or Fallout. After a while, I'll end up just skipping a bunch of dialogue. But because I had no idea what I was doing or where I was going, I was paying super close attention to everything every NPC told me. And when I would figure out where to go next, it was really rewarding. It's something that we don't get much these days. I think the last game to really do that for me was Dark Souls. Because I wasn't following any guides, I just did what I kind of saw next, and I think that meant I skipped a bunch of the side missions. I think I was just kind of lucky finding out where to go next pretty quickly, even finding that ancient key. You know how you have that dog side member and his grandfather at the end of the game uses the ancient key to unlock something? I already had the ancient key. I didn't know what it was for when I found it, and I'd wondered what happens if I had done that mission without finding the key. Would I have had to have gone back and then back? I sort of just kept lucking into what to do next. Yep, no guide needed here. I am a true expert at video games. That was until Rocket Town. I am sad to inform you that I did have to use a guide, not once but twice. There is a moment in the game where you need to speak to Sid in his rocket ship, but in order for you to trigger that, you need to go to this door in his house, and for whatever reason I missed this door like 4 times every time I went into that damn house. Look, I'm not perfect, the door's sort of hidden, not really, I'm pretty stupid, but looking up a guide saved me about 4 to 5 hours, so I'm pretty ashamed that I missed that door, but trust me, it won't happen again. Back then, I can't really recall playing many open world games as large as Final Fantasy VII, except for maybe Zelda 2 on the NES, and for the most part, I found it rather easy to progress the story, to the point where it felt like I was almost playing the game too quickly. I can't be certain if that's how the game is designed, or if I'm indeed a smarty pants, but you let me know in the comments where you got stuck playing Final Fantasy VII when you first played. Oh, and the other part I needed a guide for was, yeah, it was another door that I missed. I was running around this area for like an hour looking for it, and I was like, I cannot find out where to go next, and it was just another door. These hidden doors. For whatever reason in my mind, I thought Final Fantasy VII would be like a 20-hour long game, and when Aerith gets killed by Sephiroth, I thought there would be some big final epic boss fight. But then it told me to insert this too, and I was sort of concerned. I felt I've been everywhere in this map. Surely if they make me keep playing this game, I'm just going to be revisiting all these areas and being bored out of my mind. Well, that's partly true, and we would end up revisiting a lot of places. That didn't stop the story from evolving further and doing what any great story does, tie up all the loose ends. I think the 32 hours that I spent playing Final Fantasy VII was the perfect length. I was really satisfied when the end credits rolled, but if it went on longer, I probably would have started to feel that the game was dragging on a bit. Overall, in my opinion, the story is far more in-depth than I had ever imagined. And it now makes sense to me why this particular game has such memorable and quoted characters. It truly was a roller coaster of emotions. Now, going into this game, I did know that it had turn-based combat. It was a fairly standard RPG trait at this time, and it's a gameplay mechanic that I really enjoy. It was surprising to me that it also had this wait element to it, where you would have to wait for the meter to refill before your next turn. I was quickly surprised when I was checking my phone real quick, and suddenly I was getting attacked over and over again. Yeah, there was a lot of times where I went to check my phone, I'd be like, oh shit, I've got to do an attack. It was pretty anxiety inducing, especially when you're looking for an item mid-battle to cure like sadness or something. I was also glad to see how full on the combat was. The strongest weapon isn't always the best option because it might mean less slots for your materia, or it might mean that you can't use the all materia effectively. This won't make sense if you've never played Final Fantasy VII before, so I'll try to explain. Materia is essentially a magic power that you can equip to any character. Take the Restore Materia for example. When you use it by itself, you can select one of your party members to heal. But if your weapon or armor has this little link icon, you can link that Restore Materia with a all materia and heal your whole squad at once. It was surprisingly extensive, and when I got to the end of the game, I realized that I'd only just scratched the surface of everything to do with combat. There are hundreds of different combinations you can choose from, and I know that my combinations were probably not the strongest, but they suited my gameplay style perfectly, and it gives players a huge reason to have multiple playthroughs. My build wasn't the strongest, and I'm sure you guys watching could recommend plenty of builds that would make me stronger, but even then the game was still pretty easy. Probably too easy. In the whole main story, I think I died twice, and both times I was barely paying attention. Now I know there are optional bosses, and trust me, after I completed the story, I went back to try to defeat them and they kicked my ass. But I do wish there was a little more difficulty in the main story. Maybe I was just a high level, because I didn't end up skipping one fight the whole game. I actually didn't know you could run away from a fight until about hour 30 of the playthrough. I also want to applaud the game for how many different types of enemies there are. A real problem in modern games is the lack of enemy types, and well, Final Fantasy VII almost had too many. Like, what the hell is this contraption? I also really enjoyed the random mini games they'd throw in at you. The world is under threat. The planet is decaying. Let's go fucking snowboarding. Averith just died. She sacrificed herself for us. Let's go to the casino and play some arcade games. Gosh, I love games that take themselves seriously, but can also take a moment to be silly and remind us that we are here for fun. Now, one of the hardest parts of playing these retro games are the graphics, I'm not gonna lie. We do get used to a certain standard of graphics over time, so the only way I can fairly judge Final Fantasy VII is to have a look at the graphics of other games that came out that year. I think it's also fair to compare it to games of a similar genre. It's safe to say that the cutscenes in Final Fantasy VII are far more superior than those of GoldenEye 007. But if you compare it to Diablo 1 by Blizzard, who are known for their epic graphics in cutscenes, then you can easily see that it's of a similar quality, if not better. Now, you might make the argument that Diablo 1 was a PC game, so of course it's going to be better than a PlayStation 1 game, but Diablo 1 also came out on the PlayStation 1. So it just goes to show how ahead of its time Final Fantasy VII was. And the question I'm asking myself, and I'm sure you're all eager and very excited to know, did Final Fantasy break into my top 20 games of all time? No, it didn't. I think it's a great game, and I think it would have been in my top 20 of all time if I played it back when it was released in 1997. The story is iconic, the gameplay is deep, and the graphics were top tier for the time. But the games in my top 20 stay safe for another day. Look, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm going to be playing through a lot of games that I haven't played, not just retro, current games like Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, the new God of War series. We're also going to go back and play games like Majora's Mask, Zelda. So let me know what you want to see, more retro or more sort of newer games, or a mixture of both. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Until next time, see ya.